Close your eyes and feel the bite of the wind, not the chilly breeze of a modern winter morning, but a wind so cold it feels like 1,000 needles pricking your skin, carrying the scent of dry grass and ancient ice. We're standing in the Mammoth Steppe, a vast frozen highway that once stretched from the UK across Russia and all the way to Canada. In this world, the sun is a pale, distant coin, and the land is ruled by a titan that turned the concept of staying warm into an art form. We are talking about the woolly mammoth, the Mammothus primigenius. For centuries, we have viewed them as the clumsy, hairy cousins of the elephant, but that is a gross understatement. The mammoth was a biological fortress, high-tech machine designed to thrive in a world that would freeze a modern human solid in minutes. This is the biography of the last titan of the frost, a creature that survived the harshest climate in Earth's history, only to face a tragic, lonely end while humans were already building the pyramids. The story of a mammoth begins in a nursery made of blizzards. Imagine a newborn calf weighing about 200 pounds, roughly the size of a large dog, but much, much fluffier. Unlike their modern African cousins who are born into the sweltering heat, a baby mammoth enters a world where the temperature can drop to -50 degrees Celsius. To survive the first hour of life, they had to be born with a biological parka. Even at birth, they were covered in a thick layer of fine hair. And beneath that skin, they already possessed a layer of brown fat designed to generate heat through non-shivering thermogenesis. It was essentially an internal furnace. The mother mammoth, the 3-ton matriarch, kept the calf tucked between her massive pillar-like legs, shielding it from the howling Siberian winds. In these early months, the calf was a professional eater, consuming gallons of fat-rich milk to build the insulation it would need for its first real winter. As the calf enters its juvenile years, the Ice Age gym begins. Life on the steppe was a never-ending hike. To find enough grass to survive, a mammoth had to be constantly on the move. This is where we see the development of their most iconic tool, the tusks. In a young mammoth, these were just small buttons, but as they hit their teenage years, the tusks began to spiral outward and downward. These weren't just for fighting off cave lions, they were specialized snow shovels. A mammoth would use its tusks to sweep aside deep snowdrifts, to reach the nutrient-rich dry grass buried beneath. This was a massive energy investment. A growing mammoth had to eat up to 400 pounds of vegetation every single day. Imagine trying to find 400 pounds of salad in the middle of a frozen wasteland. That was the daily grind for a young titan. They were essentially giant, hairy lawnmowers that never stopped moving. By the time our mammoth reaches its prime at age 25, it is a masterpiece of Pleistocene engineering, standing about 11 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing 6 tons. It is roughly the same size as a modern African elephant, but its specs are entirely different. Let's look at the fur. It wasn't just hair, it was a triple-threat insulation system. First, there was the underwool, a dense, soft layer that trapped air against the skin. Then, there was the overcoat. Long, coarse-guard hairs that could grow up to 3 feet long, designed to shed water and snow. Finally, they had a secret weapon. Sebaceous glands that secreted a thick oil to waterproof their fur. If a mammoth fell into a frozen river and climbed out, the water would beat off its fur like it was a giant Gore-Tex jacket. Then there's the mammoth hump. For a long time, people thought it was just a weird bone structure. But we now know it was a massive reservoir of fat, similar to a camel's hump. This was their battery pack for the winter. When the grass was covered in 10 feet of snow and the blizzards lasted for weeks, the mammoth would slowly burn the fat stored in its hump to keep its heart beating. Even their ears were an evolutionary masterpiece. While African elephants have giant ears to radiate heat and stay cool, the mammoth had tiny, furry ears the size of a dinner plate. Evolution realized that in the Ice Age, a big ear was just a fancy way to get frostbite. So it shrunk them down to the bare minimum. But the most fascinating part of their prime was their social intelligence. Mammoths lived in complex, female-led herds, just like modern elephants. They mourned their dead, protected their weak, and possessed ecological maps. And their brains that allowed them to remember waterholes and grazing lands across thousands of miles. They were the architects of their own world. By trampling the snow and eating the shrubs, they prevented forests from growing, which kept the Mammoth Steppe a grassland. The mammoths literally created the ecosystem that supported them. They were the kings of a world they built with their own feet. However, even the most perfect machine has a breaking point. Around 10,000 years ago, the Great Thaw began. The climate started to warm up, and the vast, dry grasslands of the steppe began to turn into wet, boggy tundras and thick forests. For a mammoth, this was a disaster. Their heavy bodies were designed for hard, frozen ground. Now they were sinking into the mud. The nutrient-dense grasses were being replaced by moss and trees that were either toxic or low in calories. It was like someone replaced their high-protein diet with cardboard. And then there was the two-legged problem. As the ice retreated, a new predator began to move north. Homo sapiens. Humans didn't just hunt mammoths for meat, they used every single part of the animal. We used their bones to build huts, their fur for clothing, and their tusks for art and tools. While the changing climate was stressing the mammoth populations, human hunting was the finishing move. We were smart. We used pits and spears, and we targeted the young and the weak. The giant herds that once shook the earth began to fragment and vanish. By 4,000 years ago, the woolly mammoth was officially gone from the mainland. But the story has a haunting postscript. A small group of survivors became stranded on Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean off the coast of Siberia. As the sea levels rose, they were cut off from the rest of the world. On this island, the last titans lived for another 6,000 years. Because the island was small and resources were limited, they underwent island dwarfism, shrinking in size over generations. But the real tragedy was their DNA. Because the population was so small, they began to suffer from genetic meltdown. They lost their sense of smell. The fur became thin and silky, which offered no warmth. And they likely suffered from dozens of hereditary diseases. The last mammoth on Earth didn't die in a glorious battle. Likely died alone, confused and genetically broken, while humans in Egypt were already busy finishing the Great Pyramids of Giza. So are they truly gone? Evolutionarily speaking, the woolly mammoth is the sister species to the Asian elephant. They are so closely related that some scientists believe they could be hybridized. Today, the dream of de-extinction is no longer science fiction. We have found incredibly well-preserved mammoth carcasses in the permafrost, some still with liquid blood in their veins. Scientists are currently working to edit the DNA of Asian elephants to include mammoth genes for hair, fat, and cold tolerance. We might, in our lifetimes, see a neo-mammoth walking the Siberian tundra once again to help fight climate change by restoring the grasslands. We study the woolly mammoth because it represents the ultimate what-if. It was a creature that reached the absolute peak of mammalian adaptation, only to be undone by a few degrees of temperature change and a clever ape with a spear. It reminds us that no matter how big you are always at the mercy of the planet's balance. The mammoth wasn't a failure. It was a success story that simply ran out of time. The next time you look at a snowy mountain peak, imagine a 6-ton, hairy titan standing there, its tusks sweeping the snow, reminding us that once the world was a kingdom of ice, and the mammoth was its last great king.